Tony.
Thank you, Bill. First of all, my name is Tony Riggs. I didn't want to start off at a screeching halt. Last year when I was giving this speech, I went through the whole litany of my life and politely sat down, and Bill chimed in with, "Tell them who you are, Tony." So I'm Tony Riggs. My career at TIC began in 1960. I was an FM classical music announcer, on and off until about 1968. I started off, and I must say, I have to thank Bill Hennessy for landing me that job. I was a student at the University of Connecticut at that time, and doing quite well as an engineering student, until I came to WTIC, when my interests kind of changed. My grades went down, and I guess that's why I have this career in broadcasting. I worked Saturdays only at TIC that first summer, and Sunday through Friday at WILI in Willimantic. So I had a full summer then, and I think that's why the bug bit me and why I stayed in broadcasting. When I left TIC at the end of the 60s, I got married. My wife and I went to Europe. That's where I had met her, and so we went there for our extended honeymoon. Came back, moved to the Washington, D.C. area, where I got a job at WAVA, which was a rip and read all-news station, and was there for one miserable year until WETA came calling, WETA being a public radio station, and I'm proud to say that I was the first voice heard on that station. I was part of that first crew and was there for 13 years, and then went to the Voice of America, 1983, having worked there for 3 years part-time. So I was working at ETA and Voice of America. And my career ended 21 years later in 2004. Now, we heard mention of strange pronunciations at WTIC and the fact that TIC was very persnickety about pronunciations. Same holds for Voice of America. They, as you can imagine, they'd have to be. And they had some really strange ones too. I never used to say Neanderthal. It was always Neanderthal, but at Voice of America, it's Neanderthal. And I don't know what's correct now, but that's what I say now. Scientists seem to say that. Another one, get this, was junta for junta. Why they asked me, or why asked us to say junta, I don't know. It just didn't feel right. Pronunciation was probably even more stressed at The Voice, because we're reading newscasts, after all, to different parts of the world. So when you're reading a story about what's happening in Poland, you have to know how to say Lech Wałęsa and Kraków instead of Krakow. We had one of our staff announcers whose part-time job was to go around to the different language services getting the pronunciations of all the names that had cropped up that day. So, and that was almost a full-time job, and they were very particular on that. So beginning with TIC and ending when I was at VOA, pronouncing everything properly became one of my idiosyncrasies. I had a wonderful career. It began beautifully at TIC, where I had wonderful mentors. You couldn't ask for anything better, including some gentlemen who are in our audience today. I thank you so much for wonderful memories, and they were indeed golden years.
And Louise, can you make your way up here?
Can I do it right here?
Well, we want you on camera. Well, Dave says he'll photograph you from where you're standing, so here we go.
Thank you, Bill. I went to WTIC in 1952. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school. I was working in the stenography department at Travelers, back in the days when they used to address envelopes. And that was my job, and I thought I had a big job. But then my supervisor at the time came along and said to me, they need somebody up at the radio station. Would you like to go for an interview? And I said, yes, I would. So anyways, they hired me, Miss Burbank hired me, and I went to work for Larry Kenfield and Bob King, John DeLisa in the record department, typing up music sheets. Music sheets were nothing more than the time, the name, the title of the song, the artist, and was for different shows. From there, I went to the program department, and I worked for Marge Stavola Wentworth, and I have to say she was one of my mentors. She was a great lady to work for. At the time, as I say, I was green out of high school. I came from a country town called Canton, which is not a country town today, I know, but at the time it was. I left, and I also worked for Mr. Patricelli too, and I can remember Frances Mulcahy was his secretary, and I can remember him instructing her to call in one of the announcers at the time after he went off the air, because Mr. Patricelli would sit in his office with that radio and he would be listening to what was going on. And if he heard something that was not quite right, they were down in his office with the doors closed. After I left, and then a few years later I needed a job and I went back to WTIC, and that's when I went into the sales department. I worked for Mr. Tyrrell, Ernie Peterson on the third floor over in Broadcast House with Lou Krause and Don McGovern and Joe McGinnis, names that we haven't heard mentioned, all of them today. They were three great guys. They really were. I really enjoyed it. My fondest memory of my office was opposite the coffee shop. So even though I didn't know a lot of you by name, but I did recognize you by faces, because at some point through the day, you would go into the coffee shop for coffee or soda or whatever. Behind my office was a gal called Grace Sapsuzian, and I think that's a name that some of you will remember also. And Grace was, well, she went over the continuity to copy, and all the advertisements and different things that were used on the air went over her desk first. And she was quite a gal, and she was quite a stickler also. And I can remember once or twice she and Bob Steele having quite a discussion about the correct pronunciation of a word. Bob had one way to pronounce it, and Grace had another word that had to be pronounced. I left, as I say, I started in 52 and I left in 65. Great years. Thank you.
You left in 65, Louise. You were what we would call an escapee. You escaped before television changed ownership.
Yes,